Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. I'm Eduardo Quay. The eyes of the world were on Iranian President Hassan Rouhani when he stepped up to the podium at the United Nations General Assembly, with friends and foes of the Iranian regime divided over whether the recent conciliatory tone by the newly elected president signaled a real change in policy towards the West, particularly on the nuclear issue, or whether, as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu bluntly said, Iran's strategy is really to talk and play for time so it can finish building a nuclear weapon. My guest today to talk about the dizzying diplomatic developments surrounding Iran is Farhad Khosrokhavar, a sociologist and author of numerous books on Iran and the Arab world. His last work, Iran and the Challenge of the 21st Century, was published last April. Welcome to France 24 once again. We are very happy to have you here to try and make some sense for our viewers of what is indeed a very complicated situation. The first question is, what is your assessment, what is your reading of Rouhani's speech before the General Assembly?
I think he tries to have a kind of much more open, attitude towards the West. That's in contrast to what, Ahmadinejad said, for instance, last year, which was, uncompromising and a populist, discourse that wanted to give a kind of diabolic picture of the West. Now there is a kind of opening towards the West for many different reasons. One of them is that Iran masters what might be called the technology of enrichment. So they know, if necessary, they can, in a year or so, accede to the nuclear bomb. They can stop it because of the economic sanctions and because of the situation of Iran, which is totally isolated, in the Middle East nowadays. And they would like to put an end to this situation.
But and if they can build an atomic bomb, as you say, within a year, why don't they just go ahead and do it?
Because they don't need it. They want to master the technology in order to have the possibility, if necessary, to go beyond that. But the price to pay is very high. They fully well know that if they go up to the level of, let's say, North Korea, they will be bombed. Because by the Americans, who would not accept that, because of the Israelis, because of the other allies, Saudi Arabia, for instance, doesn't like it. Or even Egypt or the others nowadays, If Iran gets the atomic bomb, those other countries would like to get it as well, so that the whole nuclear treaty will be useless.
You think that the United States would really bomb? They didn't do it for North Korea. They didn't do it for Pakistan.
It's different because Iran is, antagonizing Israel, is antagonizing, Saudi Arabia, and the others. So the situation is totally different in that respect. Iran, is somehow the regional power that could induce some kind of instability in the region if it had a nuclear bomb, and could use it, successfully here or there. So it's a situation which is different from North Korea. North Korea doesn't, threaten Israel. North Korea, threatens partially South Korea, but South Korea is well defended by the Americans. So that's the major difference. But on the other hand, in Iran, the Ayatollah Khamenei, feels not threatened by the new president. He felt, threatened by Ahmadinejad, and even before him by Khatami.
I was going to ask you, excuse me for interrupting, is there a real difference now between what is happening now and what happened with Khatami when he was elected in, I believe, 1995?
Yeah, because, Khatami had a social movement behind him. He was supported by a large, massive number of young people, educated young people, middle classes, modernized middle classes. And so the supreme leader felt, insecure towards him. And Ahmadinejad had a populist discourse. So the so-called mustadafin, that means the oppressed or the those who were, at the bottom, could have, threatened the supreme leader. Now he feels secure. And he knows that, that Rouhani is not somebody who would put into question his leadership.
So Rouhani has his full support in this?
Up to now, for instance, he in his latest speech, Ayatollah Khameneis said we should have some kind of heroical flexibility towards the West, which is new, because before that, it was a kind of discourse of uncompromising, attitude towards the West. Now there is a kind of gradual openness. It doesn't mean the negotiations will succeed. One should be very careful, One should not, count the chickens before they have hatched. But my guess is that since, let's say, 15 years ago, it's perhaps the most favorable environment for a mutual understanding and for a kind of compromise.
Is this because of the sanctions? Is this a major reason for the opening?
One of the reasons is the sanctions, of course, because of the economic crisis of Iran, which was due to the sanctions, but at the same time to the, I would say, catastrophic economic policies of the populist President Ahmadinejad. But still, sanctions have been efficient, and sanctions have multiplied by almost 3 the price of dollar. Even nowadays, it's around 3,000 to months, which is much higher than, let's say, 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so the Iranian regime needs these sanctions to be lifted in order to have a kind of economic development.
Well, there are many doubters, certainly Israel, the first among them, who say, well, if they are so serious about not building a nuclear bomb, then why have they recently installed advanced centrifuge, and why do they continue to deny access to their nuclear facilities for inspection?
That's, that's what the discussions will be about. I mean, Iran probably will be ready to let, the inspectors of the United Nations get access to them, would be much more open to it, might even stop some of it, if in exchange they feel they will have, the sanctions lifted. So it depends on both sides, On the American side, the fact that they didn't bomb Syria has been very positive. Mm-hmm. Because if they had bombed Syria, Iran would not have, had any kind of serious negotiations with the West, because they would feel, insecure. Now there is a kind of, I would say, atmosphere of détente.
Right.
And so within it, the probability to reach an agreement is much higher than before. But it doesn't mean it will succeed. It means both sides have to make, some kind of compromise.
Right. Now, of course, Israel, we all remember just 1 year ago, Netanyahu before the General Assembly with his drawing of the Iranian bomb and his drawing of the red line. And now he is very much on the defensive. And there are criticisms of the way that he is dealing with this, even from former Israeli ambassadors, former members of his own cabinet, saying that he really cannot show himself just to be a naysayer and a warmonger. What do you think would be the attitude that Israel should have in this situation?
I think the Israeli attitude, of rejecting outright the Iranian proposals is counterproductive even to Israel. They have to have a balanced attitude. Of course, they push towards some kind of, toughening of the Americans, but they cannot go beyond certain levels. If Iranians and Americans and the West find, solutions, a beginning of a compromise, they have to abide by it. The Israelis have to abide by it. They cannot dictate, the conditions of, let's say, these compromises.
So you think that unilateral action by Israel, for example, of bombing Iranian nuclear installations is out of the question?
It's not out of the question, but if they did it, they would be totally isolated, and then they would be, treated as a kind of pariah. My guess is that if they wanted to bomb, they should have done it, let's say during Ahmadinejad's mandate, and not now. If the negotiations are not successful, of course, then there will be a case for that sort of, warmongering. But otherwise, at this moment, I see no way for the Israelis to do it, because then they should have the support of the Americans. And I'm not sure, I'm convinced that the Obama administration does not want to bomb Iran at this moment.
Mm-hmm. So you seem pretty hopeful that these negotiations can actually, even though they will be extremely difficult, can actually succeed, and an agreement on this nuclear issue can be made between essentially the United States and Iran, but also other countries.
I would say I'm more optimistic than ever before. Let's say almost 15 years ago. But it doesn't mean it will succeed. In order to do so, both have to have a sense of compromise. And I'm not sure that at one moment or another, one side will not retreat because it cannot go or doesn't want to go beyond certain levels.
Or for internal political reasons as well.
Exactly. Internal or external, for instance, because it's not only Israel who's against this sort of compromise. Saudi Arabia seems to me, against it as well. And many other countries who are afraid of what they call the Shiite arch, are against it as well. So it's a problem, which is much more complicated than sitting and finding a solution, ad hoc.
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry we're out of time. This is just fascinating. Thank you for coming to see us, and please do come again so we can keep talking about this issue.
With pleasure.
And please do stay tuned to France 24 for more news in French, English, and Arabic.